Hundreds of millions of people use social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter every day. Both of those platforms and others are in the early stages of moving to produce their own television and media content. Today on Roundtable Perspective, Dr. Cory Barker joins me in examining the changing roles in social media and the changing relations of production among some of the major media players. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Cory Barker from Bradley University, where he teaches journalism in the Department of Communication. Dr. Barker got his PhD just recently from Indiana University and his master's in popular culture from Bowling Green. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm happy you're here because your research and your teaching really is how we are contemporary media aficionados, I guess. Social
Absolutely.
Media has been elevated way beyond how we used to talk about traditional media. So the work that you're doing is really important for us to be able to understand that. I thought that we could start with your recent article on Facebook and Twitter moving towards live TV. It seems everybody wants their own streaming service, and some of the traditional distributors, including traditional distributors on social media like Facebook and Twitter, are hoping to have their own production so they can control their own content. What did you find when you were doing this work?
Yeah, I think what I found in this research is that it's exactly what you said, is that so many of these platforms start as partners or they start as curators of other people's content. And that allows them to enter into different marketplaces that they maybe wouldn't have been in otherwise, right? So for Twitter and Facebook, it was being part of the broader social TV movement that took over in the late 2000s into the 2010s, kind of getting people to talk a lot about television on social media, being those places for conversation, for live tweeting, for circulating memes and videos.
When you say social TV, do you mean like fans of a particular show would turn to social media to discuss the...
Absolutely. So, ABC is probably the most famous example with the Shonda Rhimes shows, getting people to live tweet during Grey's Anatomy and Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. So trying to create a space for fan conversation that can then be channeled into live viewership, ad ratings, sponsorships, product placement, all of those things. So Twitter and Facebook in particular started there working with Hollywood in those kind of promotional spaces, and have both now moved into spaces where they want to be at least more in control of the content. They might not be the direct producers. They might be licensing or having deals with production companies. But
buying something from another studio
Correct.
That becomes their property.
Yeah, but they want to be the place where that content lives or streams live or even streams on demand in the case of a lot of the Facebook content. But they now want the brand equity and the prestige of now having the content instead of just being the place where people talk about the content.
Does Facebook in particular, are they interested in, like streaming services, you have to pay a monthly fee? Is Facebook doing that, or will they continue to deliver it so-called free?
I think they'll stick with free, if only because they make so much money off of advertising revenue that goes across their platform. I think I saw a recent study showed that they make anywhere between 80 and 90% of their overall revenue comes just from ads. So they can still sell ads opposite those streaming video options. But I think they're interested in using that to get people to stay on those platforms longer, to click on things that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise clicked on, to only further, embed people into those ecosystems so they can sell more advertisements based on that.
It's probably important that we clarify why advertisers give Facebook money. I mean, what Facebook is really delivering. We may think we're getting this chat platform, but what we're doing is delivering our eyes and our interests that is then sold to an advertiser.
Yeah, and it's even beyond our eyes and our interests. It's the just information that we give up, right? The information that we put in there about ourselves from...
Oh, on Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. From, liking photos to posting photos, but literally putting in, our name, our address, our birth date.
Where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Checking into where we are, the things that we post, the things that we like, the things that we even search for. Facebook all media platforms, new media platforms have such sophisticated algorithms that it's almost impossible for us to conceive of how those work on a second by second or millisecond by millisecond
we
basis.
only witness that when we go back to Facebook or Twitter, and suddenly there's,
Yes.
like if I bought a sofa, I'm going to see ads for ottomans or
Absolutely.
end tables. And where did that come from? It's because I've been identified as a buyer of a sofa, and then I've sold to whomever.
Yeah. And they think that the video strategy, particular for Facebook, I think is really interesting because there's an increased push generated by YouTube in a lot of ways to get people to spend more time on these platforms.
Yeah.
And this is obviously something we can talk about as far as there are so many different options. There's so much information that is kind of cresting onto us like a wave at all times that now these platforms don't want us to just click and kind of move on, click and kind of move on. They like that, that's great. But what they really like is that we click and then we stay there, right? Because they can then sell that to companies or companies who own companies or advertisers.
Because we're more apt to see the advertisement if we're hanging around through the whole,
Yeah.
which would be why you might want to have your own content, a 30-minute show or an hour show, because
Yeah.
you're still going to get the advertisements, whether it's product placement or in the ads and the peripheries.
Yeah, and I think some of that is also Facebook has a reputational problem, and they are in some ways doing what so many different content producers have done over the last 15 to 20 years, which is use the emergent prestige of television as a space to like legitimize themselves, right? They can say now, we have programs that are made by people that you recognize or people that you respect in the industry, and therefore you should come and watch it there. And now Facebook can be known for something that's not just, the Russia interference in the election or any sort of organized harassment or all of the problematic things that we see about Facebook every single day.
Is this part of the entire kind of media ecosphere? Because Comcast, which was a cable provider, now owns NBC and Universal Pictures. Perhaps for the same reason, because they were distributors, but now they're content producers, so they have some control over the distribution. They also own the content. Is that part of this?
Absolutely. I mean, if I've looked a lot at kind of the history of the media industries as part of my research into new and recent developments, trying to historicize these things, and over time throughout the history of media, you see companies start in one place, often as a distributor or a partner in kind of promoting things, or licensing other people's content. You see this with basic cable channels, the introduction of cable. So much of what was on cable at the beginning was old movies, licensed old sitcoms, those sort of things. And then over time, they start creating their own content to create a brand, to get prestige, to get recognition. And you see that on the corporate level as well, where it's a little bit more obviously kind of strategic in that we want to own everything, right? We want to own every part of the process, from production to distribution to literally how it gets to you, beyond just like, is it distributed in a theater versus is it on a DVD? We want to own the pipes. We want to own the wires.
If you own the studio and you own the broadcaster and you own the distributor, you've pretty much captured any revenue down that stream.
Yeah, and a lot of the traditional media companies are now racing to figure out what to do because of the emergence of social platforms like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter, and obviously Netflix, which kind of bridges all of these different things, where their argument to even, the US government is we need to be as big as possible to face off against companies like Facebook and Netflix and Google that are so huge because of, minimal regulation across those industries, that now in the traditional Hollywood sector, we've swung back to most, no regulation really at all, where you can own pretty much everything that you want, and there's really no pushback from a regulatory body. And the argument is we need all of that, because otherwise companies like Facebook or Google or Netflix are going to just run roughshod over us, and we're going to be in trouble.
So the idea, one of these, it's a kind of a larger myth that with social media, we don't need to be worried about the mergers of the major media because they cannot dominate, because now we can produce our own, distribute our own. And Netflix was kind of one of those upstarts that looked like it was undercutting Disney or NBC or whatever, but they're big enough that they've caught on that now they have their own streaming services, and Netflix is, I don't know, maybe bumping up against the response of some of the bigger media companies?
I think that's absolutely true. I think for a while, the traditional media industries the studios, the networks, et cetera, were interested in partnering with Netflix because there was a new platform for them to put
and
their
audiences,
content.
right,
Yeah,
yes.
and if people are cutting the cord or they're not going to the movies as much, wow, we should put our content on Netflix because we'll get more eyes, we'll get money from that. And Netflix, just like so many of these other content producers over the history of the media industries, realized, well, now we get more people. There are already people there. We should start producing our own content that we can control. We don't have to deal with these traditional studios or production houses or anything like that. And people are already so ingrained in the Netflix system, particularly, each new generation.
Once you watch Netflix, you don't want to see an advertisement.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it becomes...
Right.
Yes.
And when you are each new generation of consumer who didn't necessarily grow up with cable in the same way that even I did, right, who don't have cable in any way and watch everything on Netflix or YouTube or some streaming service.
And you can do it on your laptop.
Absolutely, or your phone, and do it anywhere. So Netflix created enough market demand for Netflix as a whole that now they feel like they don't need these studios and their legacy content in the same way. The question is whether or not that will continue to be true. Netflix is spending a lot of money both on originals
trying to do originals
and licensing, but they are slowly but surely getting rid of a lot of their things that they majorly license. So the big two are Friends and The Office, which makes up still like 15 to 20%, I believe, of overall streaming, which is pretty wild given all the things that are available on Netflix. Both of those are leaving Netflix by the end of next year. They'll both be gone and on separate streaming platforms owned by their corporate parents. So The Office is going to a NBC Comcast service called Peacock, and Friends is going to a Warner Brothers Time Warner service called HBO Max. And so the question is, how much does Netflix really need those things? They believe they don't. They believe that they've created enough brand equity and enough content and that they will just keep producing content that it won't matter.
The interesting thing for me is, as audiences, as viewers, we're kind of at this end and we're making our decisions based on what we are attracted to or what pleases us, what we're intrigued. But what you're suggesting is, at the same time, there's another adjustment taking place on the level of media corporations, whether it's something new like Netflix or something that's new but now is a major institution like Facebook or
Absolutely.
others, and you have the traditional Disney, Warner Brothers responding to that, so they haven't gone away, which kind of melds with many of the things that you're doing. So, because the other article that I was interested in, I think it's about to come out, is on surprise releases.
Yes.
Of how I think it's primarily music.
Right.
But the idea is that we're not going to announce that there's a new song coming up by Beyonce, but fans will know this and we'll drop this, and it's going to generate some enthusiasm, which seems, from a fan's point of view, that's great.
Yeah.
What's the motivation from, well, Beyonce, or from the record label or the television network even?
Yeah, I think on the music side, it's been something that's happened over the last 5 or 6 years, predominantly, connected to Beyonce, who's done it a few different times. And I think what she does is really interesting, is that she has such a pre-existent rabid fan base, that she has power in the music industry to basically say, I don't need the infrastructure of a single that comes out 4 months ahead of time. I don't need to do Good Morning America. I don't need to do Jimmy Fallon. I can just say, here's my album. Everybody loves me. Therefore, you'll probably love this album. And the idea behind that, beyond just playing to that fandom, is to create a hype cycle that actually breaks through all the clutter that we deal with today. Like right now, for musicians, even top shelf A-list celebrity musicians like Beyonce, it's really hard to hold the media attention cycle for more than a few days, right? So the underlying logic, I think, behind a lot of these surprise releases is to burst through that, just massive clutter of attention by doing something that is perceived as unique or novel and getting people's attention, at least in a short period of time, creating kind of a flash demand for something, a flash conversation on social media to get people to buy or download or buy and then get tickets to the concert or whatever that may be. So it's kind of taking advantage of how enthusiastic people can be on social media and how they can advocate for the things that they love to create kind of a bubble of hype that breaks through, just the endless wave of conversation. The thing that I'm really interested in that I explore in the article is how this has been played out a few times in the television and film side. In music, it's been pretty successful because there are these top flight
Well, if you
artists.
have an album, you only have to release one.
One, yes.
Which basically, even if that one goes for free, you're guaranteeing that the album, in whatever form, streaming or physical, is going to be sold. So
Yep.
you're going to recover what may appear to the fans like a gift.
Yes.
But from my point of view, it's really a promo to get you to spend something
Absolutely.
on my next product. So
Yeah, and there's a different relationship, I think, that people have with kind of their favorite musicians, particularly in the modern social media era, than what we have with just a random franchise. And that's not to say that people are not diehard fans of name a franchise, MCU, Game of Thrones, whatever it may be. But the two examples I explore were sort of failed objects, one of which was when Netflix released The Cloverfield Paradox, which was a third film in the Cloverfield franchise, which is
how
produced.
big is their audience? Was that audience as big as Beyonce's audience?
Probably not.
Probably not.
The
Which-
thing that they tried is that they promoted it with a commercial during the Super Bowl, and then the commercial aired pre-game, and then it basically in the middle of the game, it said, okay, the movie is going to be live on Netflix as soon as the game is over. The problem with that is that there was all of this industry coverage of the film leading into production and through production into release, that it was a troubled project. They had to do a lot of reshoots. They were trying to basically take a project that was not in the Cloverfield franchise and basically retroactively make it a Cloverfield movie. And so people discovered the truth very quickly, which was it was not a very good movie, that Netflix had already lost, or its original studio, Universal, wanted to release it theatrically and decided they couldn't. They sold it to Netflix. So for Netflix, it was kind of just sunk cost, and they were like, let's experiment and see if we can get this sudden interest in something that people have some knowledge of. It's a franchise that had previously released a few successful movies, but it's not Beyonce, right? And I think what happened was you can only do this surprise strategy if A, there's a pre-existing fan base, but also that people don't find out very quickly that it's not good, right? Beyonce
That seems to be one of the requirements when we get back to social media is the answer to democracy and media monopolies. No matter how big that monopoly is, Disney, and you're going to release 22 Avenger movies or however many there are,
Yep.
the product has to please that audience, at least that segment. In the case of superheroes movie, it's got to please a very wide audience. So it's not like you can just do it and then they come. It has to be able to get through that, I don't know, the network of critique, including the fan critique.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the thing in a lot of in the Cloverfield Paradox case in particular, is that the thing that they were trying to exploit, this kind of flash, ephemeral hype of a sudden release, then played against them when people actually watched it and were like, oh, this is not good. So then what were they doing? They were posting about how it wasn't good, right? And so that's a dangerous game that you play when you court social media hype as your method for awareness, attention, success. You're playing at, hoping that the critics and the fans or anybody who has a social media account is actually going to care and like what you're doing. And if they don't, then what you do just absolutely works against you.
Does this, blending another one that you worked on, which was touted out, does this partly explain why the WWE wasn't able to turn social media into their own self-promotion of their own product, because the product had kind of lost its purchase, so to speak, in the fan base? I mean, there's been a decline in viewers anyway, and their social media project wasn't going to necessarily rescue that. So.
Yeah, and I think I'm really fascinated about pro wrestling. It's sort of a bad cultural object, although that's kind of changed depending on what time we're talking about. But I think it's such a fascinating example to look at a lot of these things, but because it's on a little fringe of mainstream media culture and industry, they, meaning the WWE and some smaller companies, are more willing to kind of experiment with things, and I'm really interested in looking at these media experiments, whether it's WWE's social media or the surprise distribution. And I think for WWE, they struggled with trying to jump on the hype of, or on the back of the hype of social media when they were using this social network, which was called Tout, which was basically a short-form video service
And they put a lot of money into it.
They did,
It
yeah.
wasn't like you and I were starting a media
So
service.
they put a lot of money in the early investments. They had people kind of on the board or affiliated with consulting on the board and that sort of thing. They were right in that it was in the era of Snapchat getting big, Vine coming out. So this short form video was the direction that social media was going as this next evolution. Instagram stories, the same deal. But what they did is that they tried to take so much ownership of it and say, like, this is our thing, that you can only get so many people who like wrestling, as you suggested, to use this platform. And if it
didn't have anything else, it
correct.
wasn't. Yes.
And it's coded as, well, that's the weird network that like WWE uses to promote their stuff. Then anybody who's not interested in wrestling or WWE is going to think, why would I use that? I don't care about those things. And I think that's something they struggled with. They also struggled with trying to figure out how to use this in a storytelling mechanism. You know, they've learned to use things like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as ways to kind of further their storylines, which obviously blend kind of reality and fiction in compelling ways. And they hadn't quite figured that part out yet in general. So then when you insert this new social media platform into that, where there would be, you know, famous WWE people like John Cena, who's very corporate in that he, you know, says the things that the company wants him to say. He does Make-A-Wish, everything like that. He's doing these very sort of artificial videos where it's clear that he's not even holding the camera, you know, but it's supposed to be a confessional sort of interview. And it just feels like normal WWE TV. And then you get other wrestlers who are maybe less sophisticated, get less camera time, actually using it with recording themselves with their own phones and making it confessional. Then you're not sure, like, well, is this the thing that they want us to see, or do they want us to see that one? And sometimes wrestling wants to create that confusion where you don't know what's real and what's fake. But
that's its basis.
Yeah,
Isn't that the basis
absolutely,
of WWE?
that's the whole point of pro wrestling, is to entertain you by confusing you of what's real and what's not. But social media, because it has this kind of promise of authenticity in some ways, it confused the audience, and on top of the fact that so much of the audience was already using YouTube, they were already using Facebook, they were using Twitter, so it just seemed like another resource or another tool that the fans didn't really want to use. And when WWE saw that, they kept trying to kind of push it down their throats, which only created more fan resistance.
How does that leave us as the viewer or as the public? I mean, outside of reading your research, which I would encourage people to do, but
please, yes.
Outside of that, because you've said it a couple times, they're presenting this to the fans, and the fans want Snapchat, short form video, the surprise drop, original content on my favorite Facebook page, right? But all of that is not primarily driven by meeting our needs or public needs. It's primarily driven either to gain advertising dollars or to gain streaming dollars. Either way, it's for the interest of the corporation. But you can't put that out.
Absolutely.
I'm about to show you something that's for my own benefit. You're not going to produce it that way. But how do we know? I mean, even to the extent that in one of your pieces you talked about the short attention span of the public, and part of me thinks, well, that may be true, but that's also a consequence of having CNN effect in the news and action movies where every 15 seconds you have to, or even the WWE or UFC or mixed martial arts, to me is a reflection of the militarization of the society.
Yeah.
But we don't see it that way because we enjoy the Smackdown.
Yeah.
So I guess there's this intersection between the world in which we live and our values and the entertainment that which we give that I'm not sure how those intersect. Do they bump up against each other? Do they feed each other?
I think it's everything. I mean, that's an easy way to say it, but I think that these things are so clearly cyclically related. And I think what social media does is that it complicates those things because social media companies started by using the promise that this is going to be more democratic. This is going to be more participatory.
I can do this.
You can get what you want. It's personalized. It's participatory. We can come together, or we can have our individualized experience. When in reality, they're ultimately seeking the same sort of things that Disney has been seeking for 100 years, which is to get us into some sort of ecosystem, whether that's a streaming platform or a theme park, and keep us there as long as possible and keep us buying stuff and looking at things that would maybe potentially convince us to buy other things, right? And so I think the dissonance comes from how social media companies have gone about it, where they have tried to say, we are disrupting this ecosystem. We are bringing it to you. We are being more personalized. We are freeing you from the chains of these media companies, when ultimately they are exploring the same ideas with the same goals.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah.
Even if there have been elements where
Absolutely.
people have been able to share their ideas and exchange with people,
Yeah.
the larger frame for that only allows it in a kind of in a microcosm.
Yeah, and I think that that's why so many people are interested in YouTube just as consumers, because you get this kind of very personalized experience that sometimes feels completely divorced from the broader infrastructure of the media and social media industries. But then we see different controversies that come up where social media influencers or YouTube influencers or famous YouTubers struggle with how much they should say they're making or what kind of product placement should they do. And that almost makes them more compelling figures because they are individuals wrestling with this larger system, which we don't always see, right? We look at these things.
At the same time, some of them can use the appearance of YouTube,
Absolutely.
like you said, the shaky camera,
Yes.
and it's really a very professional, promotional
yes.
to advocate either for a political perspective or for a product. So yes. Well, the time goes fast on this show, and we didn't get a chance to speak about all of your work, but I certainly think you've given our viewers some many things to think about.
Thank you.
Social media and how we understand it. But I want to thank my guest, Dr. Cory Barker, who teaches journalism at Bradley University. Maybe we can have you back again. And in the meantime, we will be aired on public television and also on one of the social medias, the YouTube. So thank you, Dr. Cory Barker.
Thank you.